Let me ask you something. Have you ever been hurt by someone and instead of feeling strong, you felt the urge to explain yourself, to chase, to fix it, maybe even to prove your worth? Yeah, most people have been there. But here's the part that changes everything. What if the way you've been reacting is exactly why they keep hurting you? See, when someone expects you to cry and you cry, when they expect you to argue and you argue, when they expect you to stay no matter what and you stay, you're not surprising them. You're confirming what they already believe, that they can hurt you, and you'll still be there. Now listen carefully. The real power isn't in reacting. The real power is in responding differently, because the moment you stop being predictable is the moment you become unforgettable. And today, I'm going to show you something most people never learn. When a man hurts you, instead of breaking down, you can shift the entire dynamic by doing something he never saw coming. Most people don't realize this, but the moment something hurts you emotionally, you're standing at a crossroads. You can either react or you can respond. And that difference, that's where your power lies. See, reacting is automatic, it's emotional, it's immediate. Somebody hurts you, and right away your feelings take over. You want answers, you want justice. You want them to understand what they did. So you text back quickly, maybe too quickly. You explain yourself, maybe too much. You raise your voice, or you break down, or you try to fix everything in one moment. But here's the truth, when you react like that, you're not in control anymore. Your emotions are. And when your emotions are in control, the other person doesn't have to work to understand you because you're showing them everything instantly without any filter. Now listen closely, because this is where things shift. Your reaction is your power, but only when you learn how to control it. Because the moment you pause instead of reacting, the moment you take a breath instead of responding instantly, you take your power back. Let me explain why that matters so much. When someone hurts you, especially in a relationship, there's often a pattern. They expect you to respond a certain way. Maybe they expect you to chase them when they pull away. Maybe they expect you to get emotional when they cross a line. Maybe they expect that no matter what they do, you'll still be there trying to fix it. And when you keep reacting the same way every time, you reinforce that pattern. You teach them how to treat you, not with your words, but with your behavior. Now I know that might sound tough, but it's real. Because if every time they hurt you, you respond with emotional urgency, you're showing them that your feelings are available on demand, that your attention can be triggered, that your peace depends on their actions. And once someone realizes that, consciously or unconsciously, they start to take it for granted. But the moment you change your reaction, everything changes. When you don't reply right away, they notice. When you don't argue back, they feel it. When you don't explain yourself endlessly, they start wondering. And that's not about playing games, it's about breaking patterns. Because now, instead of you trying to get their attention, they're trying to understand your silence. Instead of you chasing clarity, they're sitting in confusion. And confusion creates reflection. But here's the key, you're not doing this to manipulate. You're doing this to protect your peace. Because controlling your reaction isn't about being cold or distant. It's about being intentional. It's about asking yourself, is this response helping me, or is it just releasing my emotions in the moment? And most of the time, reacting instantly might feel good for a second, but it costs you in the long run. It drains your energy, it weakens your position, and it keeps you stuck in a cycle where nothing really changes. Now imagine this instead. Something happens that hurts you, but instead of reacting, you pause. You give yourself space. You let the emotion settle before you speak. And when you do respond, it's calm, it's clear, it's controlled. That kind of response carries weight because now you're not speaking from pain, you're speaking from strength. And people feel that difference. There's a quiet confidence in someone who doesn't rush to react. There's a strength in someone who can feel deeply, but still choose how they respond. That's not weakness, that's discipline. And discipline is powerful Because when you control your reaction, you're no longer easy to read, easy to trigger, or easy to manipulate. You become grounded. You become steady. You become someone who decides, not someone who just responds. And let me tell you something else. Not every situation deserves your reaction. Some things are beneath your energy. Some people are testing boundaries just to see how far they can go. And when you react every single time, you're engaging in a game that doesn't benefit you. But when you step back, when you choose silence or calm over chaos, you're setting a standard. You're saying, without even speaking, I don't operate like that. And that forces people to either rise to your level or reveal that they don't belong in your space. Either way, you win, because you're no longer giving your power away. You're keeping it. So the next time you feel that urge, that emotional pull to react immediately, pause. Take a breath. Remind yourself that your first reaction is just a feeling, not a decision. And you don't have to act on it, because the strongest person in the room isn't the one who reacts the fastest. It's the one who stays in control when it matters the most. That's how you protect your peace. That's how you shift the dynamic. And that's how you make sure your power stays exactly where it belongs, with you. Most people walk into relationships with a hidden script in their mind. They don't even realize it, but they're expecting certain reactions, certain patterns, certain predictable responses. And over time, those expectations become comfortable. They know what to say to get a reaction. They know what to do to push your buttons. They know how far they can go because you've shown them before. Now here's where it gets interesting. The moment you stop responding the way they expect, you disrupt that script. And when you disrupt the script, you create confusion. Now understand this clearly. Confusion isn't about manipulation. It's about breaking patterns that no longer serve you. It's about stepping out of a cycle where someone has gotten too comfortable treating you a certain way. Because predictability, especially in emotional situations, creates control. If someone knows that every time they ignore you, you'll chase them. If they know every time they disrespect you, you'll argue. If they know every time they pull away, you'll panic. Then they're not guessing anymore. They're operating with certainty, and certainty gives them the upper hand. But confusion takes that certainty away. Let's say he expects you to text back immediately, and suddenly you don't. He expects you to ask what's wrong, and you stay quiet. He expects you to get emotional, and you remain calm. Now he pauses. Now he starts thinking. Now he wonders, what just changed? And in that moment, the dynamic shifts, because instead of you trying to figure him out, he's trying to figure you out. And that shift is powerful. But let's go deeper, because this isn't just about what you do. It's about what it represents. When you respond differently than expected, you're showing growth. You're showing self-respect. You're showing that you're no longer operating from the same emotional place. And people feel that. They might not be able to explain it, but they sense it. There's something unsettling, in a good way, about someone who no longer reacts the way they used to. It forces others to adjust, to rethink, to reevaluate their own behavior. Because now, the old tactics don't work anymore. And when someone's usual way of dealing with you stops working, they're left with two choices. Either they step up and meet you at a higher level, or they reveal that they were never willing to do that in the first place. Either way, you gain clarity. Now let me be real with you for a moment. A lot of people struggle with this because they think, if I don't react, won't they think I don't care? But here's the truth. There's a difference between not caring and being in control. You can care deeply and still choose not to react impulsively. You can feel hurt and still decide not to show it in a way that gives someone power over you. That's maturity. That's strength. And that's what creates real respect, because people don't respect emotional chaos, they respect emotional control. Now, when you start doing this, don't expect it to feel natural right away. It won't. At first, you'll feel the urge to go back to your old patterns. You'll want to explain yourself. You'll want to clear the confusion. You'll want to go back to being understood immediately. But that's the test. because growth often feels uncomfortable before it feels empowering. And the longer you stay consistent with your new response, the more that confusion turns into something else, awareness. They start realizing, I can't treat this person the same way anymore. And that's exactly the point. You're not here to be predictable. You're here to be respected. And respect doesn't come from reacting the same way every time. It comes from showing that your standards have changed. Now here's something even deeper. When you stop being predictable, you don't just change how others see you, you change how you see yourself. You start realizing that you don't have to be controlled by someone else's actions. You don't have to match their energy. You don't have to engage every time they create tension. You become selective. You become intentional. You become someone who chooses their response instead of being driven by emotion. And that kind of energy, it's rare, it's powerful, and it commands attention without demanding it. So the next time someone hurts you, instead of asking, how should I react? Ask yourself something different. Ask, what response would break the pattern? Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is something they never saw coming. Not louder, not more emotional, not more dramatic, just different. Calm when they expect chaos, distant when they expect pursuit, silent when they expect explanation. That's what creates confusion. And that confusion, it's not weakness. It's a signal that you've stepped out of the old version of yourself and into a version that no longer accepts the same treatment. And once you reach that point, everything changes, because now you're not reacting to the situation. You're redefining it. There's something most people misunderstand about silence. They think silence is weakness. They think if you're not speaking up, not arguing back, not defending yourself, then somehow you're losing. But the truth is, silence, when used with intention, is one of the most powerful forms of communication you have, because not everything deserves your words. See, when someone hurts you, the natural instinct is to respond immediately. You want to explain how you feel. You want to point out what they did wrong. You want them to understand the impact of their actions. And on the surface, that seems reasonable. But here's what often happens instead. The conversation turns into an argument. The argument turns into defensiveness. And before you know it, the original issue gets lost in noise. Now you're not being heard, you're just going back and forth. And the more you talk, the less your words actually land. That's why silence can be so powerful. Because silence removes the noise. It creates space. It forces the other person to sit with what they've done without you softening it, without you over-explaining it, without you trying to make it easier for them to understand. And that's uncomfortable for them. But sometimes discomfort is necessary for awareness. Now let's be clear. This isn't about giving the silent treatment to punish someone. That's different. That's emotional withdrawal meant to control. What we're talking about here is intentional silence. A silence that says, I'm not going to engage in something that disrespects my peace. A silence that comes from strength, not from avoidance. Because when you choose not to argue, you're not saying you don't care. You're saying, I care enough about myself not to lower my energy into something that isn't productive. And that's a completely different message. See, arguments often come from a place of wanting to be understood immediately. But real understanding doesn't always happen in heated moments. In fact, most of the time, it doesn't. People are more likely to reflect when things are quiet, when there's space, when they're not being pushed or pressured. And that's what silence creates. It gives both you and the other person a moment to step back, to think, to process. And here's something important: when you're always the one talking, explaining, and trying to fix things, you take on all the emotional responsibility in the situation. You carry the weight, you do the work. But when you step into silence, that responsibility shifts. Now they have to think. Now they have to reflect. Now they have to decide how they're going to show up. And that's where real clarity comes from. Because if someone truly values you, your silence will matter to them. They'll notice the change. They'll feel the distance. And they'll make an effort to understand why. But if they don't, If your silence doesn't move them at all, then you've just learned something important, something you might have been too distracted to see before. You've learned where you actually stand. And while that truth might be uncomfortable, it's also freeing, because now you're no longer chasing clarity, you have it. Now let's talk about something deeper. Silence isn't just about what you don't say. It's about what you choose to protect. Your peace, your energy, your emotional well-being. Every time you engage in an unnecessary argument, you spend energy you can't get back. You drain yourself trying to prove a point to someone who may not even be ready to understand it. And over time, that becomes exhausting. But when you start choosing silence in the right moments, something shifts within you. You become calmer, more grounded, less reactive. You start realizing that you don't have to attend every argument you're invited to. And that realization, that's powerful. Because now, instead of being pulled into chaos, you stay centered. You stay in control. You decide what deserves your attention and what doesn't. And that kind of control changes how people interact with you. They start to think twice before crossing a line. They start to recognize that they won't always get a reaction out of you. And without that reaction, the dynamic changes. Because a lot of people operate based on feedback. If they get a strong reaction, they continue the behavior. If they don't, they either adjust or they lose interest in trying. Either way, you win. Now, this doesn't mean you stay silent forever. There's a time to speak. There's a time to express yourself. But when you do, it should come from a place of calm and clarity, not from heightened emotion. Because words spoken in anger are often misunderstood. But words spoken with intention, they carry weight. They leave an impact. So silence isn't about avoiding communication. It's about improving it. It's about choosing the right moment, the right tone, and the right energy. And until that moment comes, you protect your peace by saying less. Because sometimes the strongest statement you can make is no statement at all. A pause, a step back, a quiet refusal to engage in what doesn't serve you. And in that silence, something powerful happens. You stop chasing understanding and start embodying it. You stop reacting to noise and start creating clarity. You stop giving away your energy and start owning it. And once you learn how to use silence like that, you realize something most people never do. You don't always need words to be heard. Sometimes your silence says everything. At the end of the day, everything we've talked about, your reactions, your silence, the way you shift the dynamic, it all comes down to one core thing: how much you truly value yourself. Because self-worth isn't something you say. It's something you demonstrate. It shows up in what you tolerate. It shows up in what you walk away from. It shows up in how you respond when someone crosses a line. And here's the truth a lot of people avoid. If you don't fully recognize your own value, you will keep trying to convince others to see it. You'll over-explain. You'll overgive. You'll overstay. Not because you're weak, but because somewhere deep down, you're hoping that if you just do a little more, love a little harder, stay a little longer, they'll finally treat you the way you deserve. But real self-worth doesn't beg for better treatment. It expects it. And if it's not given, it adjusts accordingly. Now listen carefully, because this is where everything changes. When you truly know your worth, you stop taking disrespect personally. You start seeing it clearly. Instead of asking, "What did I do wrong?" you start asking, "Why am I allowing this?" That shift right there is powerful, because now you're no longer internalizing someone else's behavior. You're evaluating it. You're not blaming yourself. You're setting standards, and people can feel that. There's a different energy around someone who knows their worth. It's not loud. It's not aggressive. It's calm, steady, and unshakable. They don't need to prove anything. They don't need constant validation. They don't chase, they choose. And that changes everything, because when you operate from self-worth, you stop accepting situations that drain you. You stop entertaining inconsistency. You stop giving chances to behavior that keeps repeating without change. Not out of anger, but out of clarity. You realize that protecting your peace isn't selfish, it's necessary. Now let's be real for a moment. Knowing your worth doesn't mean you'll never feel hurt. It doesn't mean you won't care. It doesn't mean you become cold or detached. What it means is you don't let that hurt control your decisions. You don't let your emotions convince you to stay where you're not respected. You don't let temporary feelings override long-term self-respect, because feelings change, but standards define your life. And when your standards are rooted in self-worth, you naturally start making better decisions. You start choosing people who choose you. You start walking away from confusion, inconsistency, and mixed signals. You stop trying to decode behavior that should already be clear, because someone who values you doesn't leave you guessing. Now, here's something important to understand. When you raise your self-worth, not everyone will rise with you. Some people will feel uncomfortable. Some people will pull away. Some people will even try to bring you back to the version of yourself they were used to. Why? Because that version was easier to deal with. That version tolerated more. That version reacted more. That version stayed even when it shouldn't have. But growth changes that, and not everyone benefits from your growth. But that's okay, because self-worth isn't about keeping everyone in your life. It's about keeping the right people. The ones who respect your boundaries, the ones who meet your standards, the ones who don't require you to shrink yourself just to maintain the connection. And when you start living like that, something powerful happens. You stop chasing attention and start attracting respect. You stop seeking validation and start embodying confidence. You stop asking for consistency and start expecting it. And here's the key: expectation backed by action. Because it's one thing to say, I know my worth. It's another thing to walk away when someone doesn't meet it. That's where most people struggle. They know what they deserve, but they hesitate to enforce it. They stay a little longer. They give one more chance. They hope things will change without any real evidence. But self-worth requires action. It requires you to align your behavior with your standards, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's hard, even when it means letting go. Because holding on to the wrong person will always cost you more than letting them go. Always. So when someone hurts you and you respond with calm, with silence, with a shift in your energy, it's not just about confusing them. It's about honoring yourself. It's about saying, I know what I deserve, and I'm not stepping outside of that for anyone. And that kind of energy, it's unshakable, because now your peace doesn't depend on how someone treats you. Your confidence doesn't depend on their approval. Your value doesn't depend on their recognition. You already know who you are. And once you reach that point, something clicks. You realize that your greatest power was never in changing someone else. It was in choosing yourself every single time. And when you do that consistently, you become someone who cannot be easily hurt, easily shaken, or easily taken for granted, because your self-worth is no longer negotiable. And that is your greatest strength. So remember this: you don't win by reacting louder. You don't win by chasing harder. You win the moment you choose yourself. Stay calm, stay grounded, and never let anyone make you forget your worth, because the real power is walking away with your peace and never looking back.